On December 13th, Russia delivered a new blow to Ukraine's energy sector. According to Ukrainian media, the raid was carried out with 93 missiles and around 200 drones. Cruise missiles, Kalibr and Kinzhal from the Navy, and ballistic missiles were involved in this attack. This was one of the most extensive bombing campaigns against Ukraine's energy sector since the conflict began. ABC News quoted President Zelenskyy, who stated that Ukrainian defense forces intercepted 81 missiles, including 11 cruise missiles shot down by F-16 fighters. He accused Russia of continuing to terrorize millions of people with these reckless attacks, while calling on the international community to intervene and provide more support to Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense declared that this action was in retaliation for Kyiv's use of attack missiles to strike a military airfield near Taganrog in Russia. Russia's targets were fuel and electricity infrastructure critical to Ukraine's defense industry. The Russian side announced that all objectives of the attack had been achieved. Ukraine confirmed the success of Russia's airstrike as the DTK Energy Corporation reported that Russia delivered a severe blow to its thermal power plants. Surprisingly, the attacks primarily occurred in western Ukraine, where electricity and gas are imported from the EU into Ukraine. The corporation reported significant damage at the Burshtynka and Pridniprovskaya nuclear power plants. Transformer stations in Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Lviv, as well as power lines across the country, were also targeted. The most dangerous aspect for Ukraine's energy sector is Russia's increased focus on attacking transformer stations directly connected to nuclear power plants, forcing nuclear units to shut down urgently. This action severely damages equipment and raises the likelihood of accidents. Yesterday's early morning strike, similar to major attacks in November, demonstrates Russia's ongoing strategy to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure during the winter gradually. Currently, 5 out of 9 units at Ukraine's nuclear power plants operate at reduced capacity. This marks the second major atomic power incident within 2 weeks. It is important to note that nuclear power plants currently provide most of Ukraine's energy supply. On December 13th, the power grid operator Ukrenergo announced stricter electricity usage restrictions. According to energy market expert Oleg Popenko, half of the country is without electricity. In Odessa, electricity restrictions have been implemented due to the severe situation, with residents expected to experience power outages lasting 7 to 11 hours daily. However, the risks are not limited to electricity, they also extend to gas and heating. Russia has once again targeted gas infrastructure. The expert stated that if the gas supply is disrupted, the electricity and heating systems will deteriorate significantly. At -10 degrees Celsius, residents in high-rise buildings may struggle to endure the harsh cold without heating systems. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have fragmented the country's unified power grid into isolated pockets of production and consumption. As a result, if one area is attacked, neighboring regions cannot transfer electricity to provide support. The collapse of the power grid is currently the Kyiv government's most significant concern. If the grid is severely damaged, Ukrainians will be unable to remain in major cities and may be forced to leave the country. The attack has also forced Ukraine's industrial complexes involved in producing and repairing weapons, military equipment, and ammunition to cease operations. This assault has heightened fears that the Kremlin aims to cripple Ukraine's already fragile energy system and cause prolonged blackouts throughout the winter, with temperatures hovering around or below freezing. Observers believe these attacks are designed to undermine the morale of the Ukrainian people, leaving them demoralized and exhausted by the conflict. Additionally, the Russian military seeks to destroy Ukraine's energy system as quickly as possible before the conflict potentially shifts, with Donald Trump taking office as U.S. President in January. It is worth noting that Russia's December 13th strike occurred shortly after Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán revealed that Mr. Zelenskyy rejected a Christmas ceasefire proposal. Prime Minister Orbán wrote on X, "At the end of the Hungarian EU presidency, we made new efforts for peace. We proposed a Christmas ceasefire and a large-scale prisoner exchange. It's sad that President Zelenskyy rejected and ruled this out today. We did what we could." Mr. Orbán did not specify how the proposal was presented or how Russia reacted. His post on X also responded to Mr. Zelenskyy, who seemingly criticized the Hungarian leader for speaking with President Putin earlier that day. In Mr. Orban's statement regarding the call with President Putin, he noted that Hungary is taking all possible diplomatic steps to support a ceasefire and peace negotiations. On the Russian side, the Kremlin acknowledged that during the call between the Russian and Hungarian leaders, Mr. Putin blamed Ukraine, accusing Kyiv of consistently pursuing aggressive policies and ruling out the possibility of resolving the conflict peacefully. Orban is one of the few NATO leaders who maintains contact with President Putin and has repeatedly called for a ceasefire in Ukraine, which has angered European leaders. However, Mr. Orban has a close relationship with President-elect Donald Trump, and along with Mr. Putin, this trio is considered a highly conservative right-wing alliance. Hawks courting Trump before the critical moment. On December 13th, US-based CNBC expressed concerns that Ukraine might lose the war next year if Europe cannot financially compensate for Ukraine, as the US is likely to halt aid under a Trump administration. On the same day, the New York Times suggested that the war would likely end by 2025, regardless of who the US president is. The paper wrote that 2025 will be the year of negotiations, and that Donald Trump's election victory would accelerate peace talks, which it described as bad news for Ukraine. The NYT stated, "The Russian military is advancing eastward. They have also reclaimed parts of Russian territory that Ukraine captured last summer. Ukraine still has weapons, but its forces are scattered. Intelligence believes they will soon run out of soldiers." Meanwhile, Trump's future special envoy to Ukraine, Mr. Keith Kellogg, stated on December 13th that the war in Ukraine could end within a few months, asserting, "I truly believe this will be resolved in the next few months. The only person who can do this is President Donald Trump, and he will do it. They're tired of killing each other out there. This is time," Kellogg added. When asked by a TV host whether Trump could invite Putin and Zelenskyy to Washington for direct talks in the U.S., Kellogg confidently stated that Trump might indeed take such a bold step. However, is the prospect of negotiations as straightforward as Trump and his advisors suggest? To answer this question, we must review the events that have unfolded since last weekend. First, President-elect Donald Trump called for an immediate ceasefire. Shortly after, Zelenskyy rejected this proposal, stating that ending the war could only be achieved once Ukraine received security guarantees, particularly NATO membership. Meanwhile, the Kremlin announced its readiness to negotiate, but Ukraine must remain neutral and recognize Russia's control over Ukrainian regions, and Western sanctions against Russia must be lifted. Following this, Kyiv launched long-range strikes on Russian airports and aircraft manufacturing facilities. Trump criticized Zelenskyy's decision, calling it foolish, yet simultaneously promised not to abandon Ukraine. At the same time, French President Macron and Polish President Tusk actively promoted the idea of deploying European forces in Ukraine to secure demarcation lines after a potential ceasefire. What do all these events signify? In essence, the fundamental positions surrounding peace talks remain unchanged. The Kyiv administration and leaders aligned with globalist forces represented by hawks in France, the UK, and the US are striving to convince Trump not to negotiate with Putin. They aim to continue Biden's war-driven policies and support Zelenskyy's 10-point peace formula, which demands Russia's withdrawal from the 1991 borders. Alternatively, if negotiations with Putin are unavoidable, Trump is pressured to allow Ukraine to join NATO. However, this is something Russia will undoubtedly reject, which would severely harm relations between Russia and the West, potentially escalating the war. To illustrate why Trump should not pursue peace with Putin, the hawks are using the example of Assad's regime collapse in Syria as evidence. Thus, it is possible that Kyiv will carry out another attack on Russia before Trump's inauguration, such as intensifying offensives in Kursk or conducting other strikes to demonstrate that Russia is not as strong as some believe. Currently, Trump has not expressed any clear stance suggesting he would meet the demands of either Russia or Ukraine. However, other issues seem even more critical for him, such as US-China relations or his promises to prevent World War III between the two most considerable nuclear powers. For its part, Russia may also attempt to push Trump, the West, and Ukraine toward its demands. This could involve achieving a significant breakthrough on the front lines or inflicting catastrophic damage on Ukraine's energy sector. Nonetheless, he seems to lean toward a compromise solution based on Trump's statements. This would involve ending the war along the current front lines, rejecting Ukraine's NATO membership, and potentially lifting some sanctions on Russia. While this position aligns more closely with Russia's views, it does not align with the stance of Kyiv or the globalist forces. In an interview with Time, when asked by a journalist, "Have you spoken with Vladimir Putin since your election victory?" Trump responded, "I cannot tell you that. It's not appropriate." This implies that Trump indirectly suggests negotiations require behind-the-scenes discussions with Russia, but he would never disclose these talks until an agreement is reached. Trump invites Xi Jinping to his inauguration. In an unprecedented move, President-elect Donald Trump invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend his inauguration on January 20th. The invitation is seen by the Republican Party as a signal to the world. A Chinese president attending a U.S. president's inauguration would mark the first such an event in history. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich was one of the first experts and strategists from the Republican Party to comment on this global signal, stating, "Look, I think Trump believes in constant offense, constant momentum, keeping things going forward. It seems that Trump wants to convey to China that we don't necessarily have to be enemies, and we can choose diplomacy and avoid conflict, a stance he seems willing to apply with Russia to end the war in Ukraine." As a seasoned negotiator, Trump applies both the carrot and the stick. Along with the friendly gesture, he threatens to impose new tariffs on China on his first day in office, with an additional 10% tariff on all goods from China. With just weeks left until Donald Trump's inauguration, businesses worldwide are preparing for heightened tensions in the US-China trade war. China has already taken an unprecedented step. According to the Epoch Times, Beijing announced it would ban the export of gallium, germanium, and antimony to the U.S. This marks the first time China has specifically named the U.S. in export control measures, including prohibiting other countries from re-exporting these minerals to the U.S. and banning the export of dual-use items for the U.S. military. It's worth noting that the U.S. government had previously designated gallium, germanium, and antimony as critical minerals, indicating that while they are not fuel-based, they are essential for national security or economic security and could create vulnerabilities in the U.S. supply chain. On the same day China announced the ban, Chinese industrial associations issued a rare coordinated response, urging Chinese businesses to use domestic chip manufacturers and declaring that U.S. chips are no longer safe to purchase. Furthermore, China is considering devaluing the yuan in response to Trump's tariffs, potentially lowering it to around 7.5 yuan to $1, as it braces for a possible trade war with the U.S. Pressure on the yuan has increased since Trump's re-election, and many investors have speculated that Beijing may abandon its stable currency policy to prepare for any tariff impacts Trump might impose on the Chinese economy. Certainly, devaluing the yuan could cause significant damage. A rapid depreciation could lead to a massive outflow of capital, triggering further currency devaluation. This cycle tends to reduce demand for Chinese stocks and bonds, potentially destabilizing financial markets, harming growth, and driving gold and Bitcoin to new record highs. Furthermore, China's economy relies heavily on exports and has long been affected by the ongoing real estate crisis and weakened consumer sentiment. News of a yuan devaluation could trigger reactions across global markets, with investors potentially pricing transactions in dollars to hedge against tariff risks, strengthening the US dollar. Overall, while Trump has not yet taken office and the trade war has not officially begun, several moves from both the US and China have already signaled that this could soon become the next global hotspot.